Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today we'll be talking about one of the more underrated national teams historically. A team you may not realize has made deep runs in the World Cup semi-regularly. We may know Sweden for things like IKEA, Minecraft, ABBA, house music, geoguessr, and in sports their ice hockey team. But Swedish soccer is more interesting than you may know. They've had spotty attendance recently and have never lifted the trophy before, but there's some runs in here that you may or may not know ever happened. Plus we get to talk about Zlatan, and that's always a good thing. Swedish World Cup history does not begin at Uruguay 1930, believe it or not, as they were one of many European countries who did not send a ship to South America for this low-prestige international professional tournament. Who cares about the World Cup? Sweden would make it to the 1934 World Cup after beating Estonia and Lithuania in qualifying games, and they would start off in Italy with a 3-2 win over Argentina. A man named Sven Jonassen got the first and second goals in Swedish World Cup history, so shout out to him. This was a good win. This was not the Argentina team that got runners-up in 1930, but we still take it how we get it. But this moved them to the quarterfinals for their first World Cup against Germany, of many. In this game, Germany would take a 0-0 game at the 60th minute and turned it to 2-0 thanks to 2 goals from Karl Hallman. The game ended 2-1 with a late Swedish consolation goal, but the blue and yellow would be eliminated from the World Cup for the very first time. Sweden would qualify to France in 1938 by finishing second place in a group with Germany, who got first, alongside Estonia and Finland. This got them to France, where this is one of the most bizarre paths I've ever seen through a knockout stage. We start with the round of 16 in Lyon, where Sweden would play a very good Austrian team. Except no, this game doesn't happen. Nope, because Austria was annexed by the Nazis. So okay, Sweden moves on to the quarterfinals, where surely they'll play a team that primarily plays soccer that's been to the World Cup in a single once since 1938. Nope, they play Cuba, who beat Romania in the round of 16 by some divine miracle, and the Swedes beat the fuck out of Cuba. 8-0. Two different Swedes got hat tricks in this game, both Harry Anderson and Gustav Wetterström, so shouts out to them. No team in World Cup history has ever had an easier path to the semis than Sweden did in 1938. I think Uruguay in 1950 is the only one that comes close. We'll talk about that soon enough. But in the semis here, the Swedes would get exposed as complete frauds. They ran into an actually very good Hungary team, and they got their brains blown out. 5-1, despite a goal in the first minute of play. Sweden would also lose in the bronze medal match to Brazil in the first matchup of what I called the yellow and blue derby in the Brazil video. They lost 4-2 here to claim 4th place at France 38, and this was their best finish yet, but goddamn is it a hollow one. This is where World War II happens and Sweden sits out as neutrals. It's hard to blame them when you consider the fates of literally every other country around them geographically, but they come out the other side as one of the more stable, unaffected countries in Europe. Qualifying for Brazil in 1950 sees Sweden in a group with Ireland as well as Finland, their neighbor, and a nation extremely affected by World War II thanks to the Winter War fought bitterly against the Soviets. The Finns would pull out before playing either one of their games against Sweden, and so Sweden would be given the spot based on the strength of their 2 wins against Ireland. At the 1950 World Cup, Sweden would be placed in a group with Italy, Paraguay, and then India was supposed to be the 4th team here, but they couldn't make it for, conflicting reasons as far as history goes. Anyway, Sweden would begin their World Cup with a banger, winning 3-2 against Italy and all but eliminating the city from advancing, as only first place moved on to the final group of 4 here. In their second game, and the second game of the group, they would go up 2-0 on Paraguay, but blow that lead, drawing 2-2 and putting their fate in the hands of the Azzurri. In the final match day, with Sweden as spectators, Italy would pull out a clutch as fuck 2-0 win to see the Swedes through on top of the group and give the giant middle finger to Paraguay. For this World Cup and this World Cup only, the group winners all competed in one final group, and this led to hilarious shenanigans all around. Sweden was here with Brazil, Spain, and Uruguay, and began the group by getting demolished by Brazil. The game finished 7-1, Brazil won. Everybody laughed because we know what Germany's going to do to them one day. But that result immediately eliminated the Swedes from then and there. They actually held a lead against Uruguay in their second game, but the 1930 champs would come back and win 3-2 in a crucial way on their way to making history at this World Cup. In the final group game, while the Maracanazo happened in the other simultaneous group game, literally one of the most famous sporting events in the history of humankind. A little over 11,000 people gathered in Sao Paulo to watch Sweden pull off a convincing 3-1 win over Spain to claim third place for this World Cup and upgrade on their fourth from 1938 in both final result and actually how impressive it was, as they beat both Italy and Spain here, two prestigious teams. We move on to Switzerland 1954, where Sweden didn't make it. It's kind of wild. They got fourth place and then third place. They're about to host the World Cup in 1958, but they're completely missing in action here. They didn't even come close either because they needed to win a group with Belgium and Finland, and they lost both their games to the Red Devils, finishing 4 points behind them in second place. So, Sweden 1958, the World Cup that was allegedly faked according to that one satirical Swedish documentary. That's one of my favorite deeper pieces in the World Cup iceberg. This is, of course, the World Cup where a Brazilian teenager named Pele would take the world by storm, and our Swedes are going to get a fistful of that soon, just you wait. But we've got a good run ahead of us here. Sweden would be drawn with a bunch of teams that wear red and green, the complete opposite of blue and yellow. Hungary, Mexico, and Wales. What a weird coincidence. Sweden would begin this with a 3-0 win against Mexico, who used to be World Cup minnows back in the day, so nothing too impressive accomplished there. Winning 2-1 against Hungary is a much more notable result. We're of course 4 years removed from the magnificent mag years of the 1954 World Cup. I've mentioned them a few times in this series. And the revolution of 1956 really weakened that national team, but still, this was a good result. A 0-0 draw with Wales in their final group game saw Sweden through as group winners. In the quarterfinals, Sweden would go up against a Soviet Union team led by a guy that some still argue is the greatest goalkeeper ever to play soccer, the great Lev Yashin. But the Swedes had the home crowd of Solna roaring them on. 0-0 at halftime, two different Swedes would put goals past Yashin in the second half to get Sweden to the semifinals for the third time now. Moving to Gothenburg for the semis, Sweden would play West Germany, the holders. This game was 1-1 at halftime, but Erik Justaviak got himself sent off for kicking a Swedish player, and the Swedes would take advantage with 2 more goals to win 3-1, dethrone the West Germans, and move on to the final in the Sweden World Cup. This is awesome, but unfortunately for Sweden, they would run into Brazil. Up to this point, this has been Sweden's World Cup, but that's not what we remember the 1958 World Cup for. Nils Lidholm would open the scoring for Sweden in the 4th minute. That was amazing. And then Vava scored a first half brace, Pele scored a second half brace, and Mario Zagallo added a 5th. Brazil won 5-2. They lifted the trophy for the first time, and the Swedes had to watch on home soil as they did it. They ran into the better team, truly, but this still sucks because, spoilers, this is the closest Sweden's ever going to come. After getting a silver medal at the World Cup, Sweden would turn around and miss on Chile 1962. Just barely. They won both their games against Belgium, Switzerland did the same, so it came down to the 2 games between the SW teams. Sweden pounded Switzerland 4-0 in Stockholm, the Swiss barely won 3-2 in Bern, and in an era before goal difference, we split this tie with a 3rd playoff. Switzerland barely won again, this time 2-1 in West Berlin, and the 1958 hosts and runner-ups had now missed both World Cups on either side of that one. It didn't get any better for England in 1966. They got put in a group with West Germany and Cyprus where only the winner got to go to the World Cup, and that was always going to be a tough ask. They got a draw in West Berlin, swept their games against the Cypriots, and despite going up 1-0 in Stockholm right before halftime, the West Germans immediately equalized, scoring on the other side of halftime as well. They held that lead 2-1 to eliminate Sweden from the 3rd World Cup out of 4. Qualification for Mexico 1970 once again cooked Sweden, putting them in with their neighbors and rivals Norway as well as France. This time though, Sweden prevailed, putting 10 goals on Norway in 2 games and cleaning up France 2-0 in Stockholm to qualify with a game to spare out of this tough group. Now with the World Cup on foreign soil for the first time in 2 decades, they were put in a group with Uruguay, the team that just won the tournament, as well as Italy, who they beat at that tournament, and Israel, who just started existing in 1950 and weren't there, obviously. This group was very defensive, so I'll be quick here. Sweden would open their World Cup journey in Toluca against the Italians, a team that would end up reaching the 1970 World Cup final. And the Swedes played them close, but it gave up a goal in the 10th minute and lost 1-0, putting them behind the 8 ball. Their next game was against Israel, and this was a must-win game, so Tom Thurston scoring early in the second half was clutch. But Motale Spriegler equalizing right after, and Israel holding on for a 1-1 draw is not an ideal result. The Swedes still had a chance to qualify with a 2-goal win over Uruguay in their last game, and it did not happen. They got the win. Shouts out to Ove Grön for scoring in the 90th minute to clinch the 1-0 win, but that left them in 3rd place, grouped behind Uruguay on goal difference, and out before the semifinals for the first time since 1934. That's pretty fucking crazy. We move on to West Germany 1974, where Sweden would be grouped with both Austria and Hungary, that's awkward, as well as Malta. This started horribly with a 0-0 home draw against Hungary and a loss in Vienna, but things picked up after. A win at home against Austria and a draw in Budapest allowed Sweden to force a 3-way tie at the top of the table. Hungary was edged out on goal difference, and Sweden remained tied with Austria on +7. They would play a 1-game playoff in neutral Gelsenkirchen, and after building a 2-0 lead, the Swedes would hold on for a 2-1 win and complete the comeback to reach the World Cup for the 2nd straight time. In West Germany, Sweden would get drawn in a group with Uruguay again, as well as the brilliant orange of the Netherlands, and I don't have anything fancy for Bulgaria, they're just here. The first group game in Dusseldorf was against Bulgaria, and it finished 0-0. No notes, just boring. Don't worry though, because their next game was against the Netherlands, a team we just covered a few videos back, led by the great Johan Cruyff. All that attacking talent and the revolutionary tactics of total football, and this game finished 0-0. So yeah, 2 games played, 0 goals for or against, and Sweden once again needed a result against Uruguay to feel good about advancing. This time they actually got it, putting 3 past La Celeste and getting through to the group stages in 2nd place with a perfect defensive record. West Germany 1974 was part of the weird double group era, so Sweden moved on to a 2nd group with the hosts West Germany alongside their neighbors Poland and also Yugoslavia. The first group game here in Stuttgart was an important one against the Poles, and a late first half goal from Gregor Lato was the difference in a 1-0 loss for Sweden. A 4-2 loss to West Germany in Game 2 officially eliminated Sweden from this tournament, although they would at least post a come-from-behind 2-1 win over Yugoslavia in their final match day to at least finish 3rd place in the group and get like 5th or 6th place for anyone who cares. Argentina 1978 saw Sweden put in a goofy qualifying group with both Switzerland and Norway, and they ran house here. 2-0 at home against Norway, 2-1 at Switzerland, 2-1 back home against Switzerland, all wins, and it didn't even matter that they lost their last game to Norway because they were through to the World Cup again, where they would be drawn in a group with Brazil, Spain, and Austria. Yikes. Game 1 in Mar del Plata was against Brazil, and they would actually take the lead here, although Brazil equalized by the half, and the game would finish 1-1. This is a good result for sure. Sweden usually gets shit-canned by Seleção, but in their next game against Austria, the important one, Sweden lost 1-0. After a 1-0 loss in their final group game against Spain, the Swedes have been grouped again. Qualifying for España in 1982 put Sweden in a group with Scotland, Portugal, Northern Ireland, and Israel, and yikes. This campaign started horribly, with a home draw against Israel and a home loss to Scotland. It recovered with some good results, particularly getting all 4 points against Portugal, but a loss to Scotland in their last game let Northern Ireland get through in 2nd, eliminating Sweden from qualification for the first time since the 60s. Mexico 1986 saw Sweden put in a group with West Germany, Czechoslovakia, Portugal again, and Malta. After beating Malta to start, back-to-back losses to Portugal at home and then West Germany and Cologne really put some holes in their ship. But once again, results rebounded a bit. They had a chance to take a top 2 spot with a game in Prague on their penultimate match day, but they lost 2-1 to Czechoslovakia and also saw Portugal pull an upset in Stuttgart. Despite beating Malta on the last match day, Portugal finished 1 point ahead for 2nd place, eliminating Sweden from the World Cup for the 2nd straight qualifying cycle. Now we move on to Italia 90, and Sweden's qualifying group included England, Poland, and Albania. After 2 rocky campaigns featuring dramatic conclusions, this group was kind of dead. Sweden drew 0-0 in both their games against England, and they actually went 2 for 2 on wins against Poland. This got them 10 points, enough for first in the group and an automatic ticket to their first World Cup since the 70s. After such an effortless qualifying campaign, the Swedes must have been geeking when they saw the group they got handed in Italy. Brazil is here to torture them again, of course, but Scotland's the other team out of Europe, and they're a team notorious for never making out of the group stages. With debuting Costa Rica as the last team, you had to feel good about Sweden's chances of reaching the knockouts. Their first game against Brazil in Turin was cagey, but the Swedes fell behind their rivals late in the first half when Careca got behind the defense and beat keeper Thomas Ravelli. Careca got his brace to put Brazil up 2-0, and although Thomas Brolin got one back, it wasn't enough to complete the comeback. Game 2 in Genoa against Scotland started poorly, with Scotland scoring on a corner 11 minutes in and eventually doubling that lead with a late penalty. Sweden once again scored a consolation goal with Stefan Schwartz putting in a great cross that was finished by Glenn Stromberg, but it was once again not enough. The Swedes lost 2-1 again and were on death's doorstep going into their final game against Costa Rica. The final group game against Costa Rica looked like Sweden was playing against Juventus or Newcastle with the black and white striped kits. This game actually started much better, with Sweden actually taking the lead this time on a free kick taken by Schwartz that was rebounded and put in by Johnny Ekstrom. This Swedes would hold on to that 1-0 lead until halftime and well beyond. But Costa Rica would find their equalizer also on a free kick when Juan Cayasso whipped the ball into the box and Roger Flores was able to head past Ravelli. Los Ticos then found a winner on the break late, with Hernan Medford getting behind the Swedish defense and finishing past Ravelli for the 2-1 lead, and eventually a third consecutive 2-1 loss for Sweden. For the first and so far only time, Sweden would finish on 0 points, bottom of the group, not even close to the knockouts. And yeah, this is just a shocking performance, especially when you consider how USA 94 is about to go. USA 94 qualifying put Sweden in a tough group with France, Austria, Bulgaria, their neighbors Finland, and Israel, and this is a wild group. The Swedes would win their first 3 games before losing in Paris to the presumed group favorites. Back-to-back home wins and then 2 1-1 draws with France and Bulgaria put Sweden in a shockingly great spot, hanging out in the top 2 with France. With 2 games left against the 2 bottom feeders in the group, Sweden finished off the neighboring Finns at home and then went to Ramat Gan to beat Israel, and thanks to France falling completely on their ass, Sweden would actually win the group, clinching an automatic ticket to the United States. Sweden would be drawn into a group with, guess who, Brazil, as well as fellow cold boys Russia and the darlings of 1990, Cameroon. Sweden would begin their journey with the Africans, and it got off to an amazing start when Jonas Thurn put in a free kick at the far post for Roger Lund, who was able to head into the empty goal to give Sweden an 8th minute 1-0 lead. They would lose that lead by halftime though, when a giveaway let Marc-Vivien Foe set up David Embe for an easy finish and an equalizer for the Central Africans. Coming out of halftime, Sweden would go down when a boot from Rigobert Song somehow got past the defense, and Francois Amon Biik would get the touch needed to beat Thomas Ravelli in goal and give Cameroon the 2-1 lead. The indomitable Lions would hold that lead for much of the second half, but a young Henrik Larsson's long shot in the 75th minute would clang off the crossbar and be rebounded by Martin Dahlin for the late equalizer. This was a decent result for Sweden, whose qualification was still possible with a win against Russia in their next game. Going from sunny Southern California to the indoor Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan, Sweden would take on their neighbors Russia in a must-win game. The Swedes would fall behind early when Ljung tripped Alexander Bordiuk in the box, and Oleg Salenko would convert to give the motherland the lead in the 4th minute of the game. Curiously though, the Russians would choose to sit on the lead and park the bus, and that came back to bite them big time. Sweden would find their equalizer before the end of the first half, also on a pen. Martin Dahlin would be brought down in the box by Sergei Gorlukovic, and Thomas Brolin would put it away to put the game at 1-1. Going into the second half, this game would be decided in the 49th minute when Gorlukovic would be sent off for a second yellow. This gave Sweden a man advantage that saw them completely overrun the Russians from here. Dahlin scored 2 headers, one set up by Jonas Thurn, the other by Kenneth Andersson, and Sweden would win 3-1 to get to 4 points and feel pretty safe about advancing. Sweden would go into their final group game, the blue and yellow derby, knowing a point would be enough to see them through to the knockouts. Sweden would sit back and hit on the counter, and that brought them fruits in the 23rd minute when Andersson hit a great shot to beat Claudio Taffarel and give the Swedes an unlikely lead. They were obviously over the moon and happy to keep this result, and despite letting Romario equalize soon after halftime, they would maintain the 1-1 draw, and that was low-key perfect. Brazil would win the group off of this since Sweden wasn't able to beat Cameroon, but the Scandinavians were past their groups for the first time in 2 decades. Despite going through as runner-ups, Sweden would get a great matchup in the round of 16 with debutant Saudi Arabia, a team that made it thanks to beating Morocco and pulling a big upset of Belgium on a wonder goal. Needless to say, Sweden was happy to be matched up against someone they would actually be favorites against. Those kind of teams are in short supply in the knockouts. Sweden would go into this game with the intent to let Saudi Arabia tire themselves out, and an early header by Dahlin would help that strategy immensely. The Saudis would attack and force some great saves by Ravelli, but when Sweden took a 2-0 lead early in the second half on a great shot by Andersson, that was like a knockout punch for the Saudis. They would get one back in the 85th minute, but they were hit back before they could equalize when Andersson got himself a brace. Sweden was on to the quarterfinals, and they were once again playing a team they were even with, after Romania pulled an upset of Argentina. Sweden versus Romania, a shot for a second yellow team besides Brazil to make the semis, and a huge opportunity for two national teams that rarely make it this far. This game was dead for a while, with an uneventful first half leading to a cagey second half. Sweden would find a late goal in the 78th minute, though, on a cheeky free kick play where Håkan Mild essentially put in a through ball that Thomas Brolin would collect and shoot to beat Florent Purnia. The Swedes tried to hold on to this lead, but Romania would answer with some free kick trickery of their own. Georgi Hagi and Ili Dumitrescu played around with the ball, Hagi shot from deep, and while the ball was deflected by the wall, Florian Radachayu would beat Pontus Kamar to the ball and beat Ravelli to send the game to extra time 1-1. Romania kept up the pressure and were the more creative team in the first half of extra time, with Radachayu striking again with a great shot from outside the box that was gifted to him by his Swedish failure to clear the ball. Stefan Schwarz would also be sent off to give Romania a man advantage, and it looked like the Swedes were cooked. Surprisingly though, they stepped up in the second half, and they would actually find their equalizer late when Ronald Nilsson put in a long cross that Anderson would beat Purnia to and head into the empty goal. This sent us to the penalty shootout, where once again Sweden shot themselves in the foot early. Håkan Mild, their first taker, would blast the ball over the bar. Radachayu hit to put Romania in the lead, then both Anderson and Hagi hit to maintain the status quo. Brolin hit to cap off an excellent game, Jan Lupescu also hit, and Sweden was running out of time. Klas Ingesson hit, Sweden continued to stick around, and Dan Petrescu stepped up and sent his penalty right down the middle. Thomas Ravelli read it like a book, made the save, and all of a sudden we were tied going into round 5. Nilsson hit penalty number 5 to give Sweden the advantage for the first time in the shootout, but Dumitrescu also hit to send the shootout to sudden death. Henrik Larsson bravely slotted his penalty into the corner to put Sweden up 5-4 in the shootout, putting it on Mio Dragbella Dedici. He would hesitantly set up, and his subpar penalty was easily saved by Ravelli. Sweden had won the penalty shootout in 6 rounds. They were moving on to the semifinals for the first time since they hosted the World Cup all the way back in 1958. What an amazing run. Unfortunately for Sweden, they were heading for a rematch against Brazil in the semis. As good as Brazil was in '94, Swedes had played well against them in their group stage game, so there was a silver lining to this draw. Going back to the Rose Bowl, the assignment was simple. Hold out for dear life against the full force of Romario Bebeto in the midfield, and hit on the break when you can. To be fair to Sweden, they were doing their best to accomplish this for the first 45. The game was scoreless at halftime thanks to the heroics of Thomas Ravelli in goal, and especially center back Patrick Anderson, who made a great block to deny Romario. Everything changed though when Jonas Thurn was sent off for a straight red on a foul that was, in my opinion, yellow card worthy. That was a wild call, and it totally doomed the Swedes, killing their offense and also hurting the defense. Brazil would eventually find their breakthrough, with Romario heading home in the 80th minute to put them in the lead for good. The Swedes fought, but would fall short to Brazil again, seeing their great dark horse run end in the semis. Sweden still had a shot at a medal with a third-place match against a fellow underdog in Bulgaria. In their third game against a team from Eastern Europe at this World Cup, Thomas Brolin put Sweden ahead early, and they never looked back. Bulgarian goalkeeper Borislav Mihailov was then beat to 2 balls, leading to 2 goals from Håkan Mild and Kenneth Anderson, and Henrik Larsson rounded him on his way to scoring as well. Sweden led 4-0. This was all before halftime. Dimitar Penev, the Bulgarian manager, pulled Mihailov from the game, and the second half saw the score remain the same. Sweden won bronze, kind of crazy, very out of nowhere, but what a result for this national team that kind of put them back on the map. Sweden would attempt to build on this run at France 1998, and the first step towards doing that is qualifying for it. They would be drawn into a group with Scotland, Austria, Latvia, Estonia, and Belarus, and this went poorly to say the least. They suffered back-to-back losses at home against Austria and in Glasgow against Scotland, and when they lost the return leg in Vienna, that was it. Austria won the group, Scotland was through in second, Sweden was out, having fallen from 3rd place in the entire world down to 3rd place in their 6-team European World Cup qualifying group. Korea-Japan 2002 beckoned, and Sweden would this time get Turkey, Slovakia, North Macedonia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova. This went much better, as back-to-back draws against Turkey and Slovakia early in the double round robin turned into 7 straight wins to close the campaign, finishing an unbeaten cycle, 1st place in their group, and making it back to the World Cup. It's great to see Sweden back at the World Cup, but everyone must have thought they were doomed when the group draw happened. They were put in Japan in a group alongside their rivals England, one of the best teams in the world in Argentina, and arguably the best team in Africa with Nigeria. This was the group of death in East Asia that year. It's one of the craziest group of deaths in the 32-team era of the World Cup, and Sweden now had to get out of it in order to reach the knockouts. First up was a game against England in Saitama, and they needed a result in this one. Things started poorly, with England scoring off a corner in the 24th minute, but the Swedes would rebound, and by the second half they were bossing the game. They would tie the game fairly early in the second half when Nicholas Alexanderson took advantage of a defensive mistake and beat David Seaman from outside the box. The Swedes had opportunities after this and could have won the game and taken all 3 points, but they would hold on for a 1-1 draw that still works pretty well for them. Ain't no fucking way. Sweden would head to Kobe next for a matchup with Nigeria, and once again they fell behind about midway through the first half. But a nice run by Henrik Larsson was finished off with an equalizer to make it 1-1 going into halftime. Larsson won a penalty in the 62nd minute and stepped up to take it himself, beating Ike Sharunmu to convert the pen and give Sweden the lead. The defense would step up from here and make sure the lead would hold, giving Sweden a huge 2-1 win and a huge 3 points. With England upsetting Argentina in their other game, this put Sweden in a simple position going into their final group game. All they need to do is draw Lobby Celeste, and they're going through to the knockouts no matter what. Of course, easier said than done, this was a great Argentina team that had guys like Pablo Aimar, Javier Zanetti, and the great Gabriel Batistuta, a man they called Batigol. The first half of this game ended scoreless. The most notable thing that happened was Claudio Caniggia being sent off from the bench, but in the second half it was actually Sweden that took the lead through a great free kick from Anders Svensson that hit near top corner and beat Pablo Caballero. This was against the run of play. Argentina had been dominating up to this point, but Sweden had the lead and damn near made it 2-0 when Andreas Andersson was denied an amazing goal by the crossbar. Ariel Ortega would win a penalty late for Argentina to give them a lifeline, and Ortega took it himself. Magnus Hedman would actually make the save to keep Argentina out of goal just a tiny bit longer because Hernan Crespo was Johnny on the spot for the rebound and he would finish it to equalize for Argentina. This wasn't enough for Lobby Celeste, though, because they were still looking up at both Sweden and England, who were drawing in their game against Nigeria as well. This game would finish 1-1. One of the pre-tournament favorites was out, and Sweden was somehow going through as group winners out of the group of death. This was an amazing accomplishment. Winning the group meant that Sweden would be going to Oita for a very winnable matchup against Senegal, a team that beat France and drew Denmark before blowing a 3-0 lead against Uruguay and backing into the tournament. The Swedes took the lead early on a corner headed in by Larsson and hoped that was going to be the magic bullet into the quarters. Unfortunately, El Hadji Diouf took over the game after this, and after creating a disallowed goal, Diouf would find Henri Camara, who set up outside the box, been closed in by multiple defenders, and unloaded a shot that went past Hedman to equalize for the West Africans. In the second half, my personal highlight of the match came when, for the second time this tournament, Sweden brought on a 20-year-old Zlatan Ibrahimovic, a guy who is simultaneously the best player to ever play for the Swedish national team, at least in my lifetime or either my parents' lifetime. And yet Zlatan is surprisingly irrelevant for this video. He does damn near score after coming on, though, being denied on a great save by Tony Silva. Here's the kicker. Zlatan, if he would have passed here, Sweden probably would have scored and taken the lead here, but he went for goal himself and was denied. That's going to kind of be a theme of Zlatan's time with the national team. The game went to extra time from here, and we're in the era of the golden goal, where one single goal decides the game. Sweden had the better of things, having a great opportunity ruled off sides and seeing another hit the post off the shot from Magnus Svensson. Unfortunately, Senegal matched this, and right before the break, Henri Camara received a nice flick on from Pape Thiaw and shot from just inside the box, surrounded by Swedish defenders. His shot wasn't super powerful, but it was powerful enough to beat Hedman and end the game right then and there. Sweden's excellent World Cup run that saw them win a group with Argentina and England in it was ended in the round of 16 by a team from West Africa that had never even been close to qualifying for the World Cup before 2002. This generation of Swedish footballers would have one more go at World Cup glory for Germany 2006, and they would begin that in a group with Croatia, Bulgaria, Iceland, Hungary, and Malta. This went well again. Sweden won 8 of their 10 games, but they unfortunately lost both their games to Croatia. With the Checkers drawing 3 of their other games, that tied both Sweden and Croatia in the final table at 24 points. But despite Sweden having the better goal difference, the head-to-head tiebreaker had priority, and that meant Croatia got the automatic ticket in first place. Luckily for Sweden, the top 2 runner-ups in the 8 European groups also got spots, and Sweden sat at the top of that table on 24. That meant they were also automatically going through their 2nd straight World Cup appearance. In Germany, they would be drawn in a much more manageable group this time, being put in with England again, but instead of Argentina and Nigeria, they got Paraguay, also out of South America, and the debuting Trinidad and Tobago out of the Caribbean. Game 1 would be against the debutants at Dortmund, and this game was wild. Trinidad's starting goalkeeper Kelvin Jack would be injured during the warm-ups, so Howard University alum Shaka Hislop would step in and have the greatest game of his life. Hislop saved a nice shot from Zlatan to keep his side level at 0-0, but then right out of halftime their left back Avery John got himself sent off with a 2nd yellow, and now it was Jover. Sweden has the man advantage, and they win. Somehow that's not what happened. Instead, the Sucker Warriors dug in and made Sweden's life even harder, with Hislop continuing to ball out in goal. He and the defense managed to hold out for a second 45-minute half, and the game finished 0-0. Somehow Hislop didn't even get man of the match, and that's because it went to Trinidad's most famous player, Dwight York. This guy's best days were behind him, and he was a striker playing way out of position as a holding midfielder, and yet he was the best player on the pitch with guys like Zlatan, Henrik Larsson, and Freddie Ljungberg all playing for Sweden. This was a supremely disappointing effort for Sweden, their attack in particular, and they needed to clean this up going into Game 2 at the Olympia Stadion against Paraguay. For the 2nd game in a row, they would be going up against a backup goalkeeper, Aldo Bobadilla, who was starting for injured first-choice keeper Justo Fiar. Sweden came into this game with a lot more energy, creating a few good chances early, but failing to convert any of them. The first half ended 0-0, and that was really bad news for Sweden. Zlatan had to come out at halftime thanks to a groin injury, and Marcus Alback replacing him didn't do the attack any favors. Paraguay had spent all game sitting back up to this point, but with Sweden tiring out, La Biroja started looking like the more likely team to score. There was so much at stake in this game, and as it crept towards a 2nd straight 0-0 result for Sweden, their manager, the great Lars Lagerbäck, in his 2nd World Cup with the team, made one more sub. Lagerbäck would bring on Johan Elmander in the 86th minute, and just a few minutes later, they finally found their first goal of the World Cup. Elmander crossed the ball into Alback for what would have been a tough finish, but Alback made a great play, doing something Zlatan would have never done. He headed the ball across goal to the onrushing Freddie Ljungberg, who was unmarked. The longtime Arsenal winger would head past Bobadilla to finally break through and take a late lead. This was the winning goal, and this 100% rescued Sweden's campaign. The only way they could miss out on the knockouts now was by losing to England and seeing Trinidad and Tobago upset the Paraguayans and swing goal difference. Going to Cologne now for another entry of Sweden versus England, and this was finally an entertaining game. They would concede their first goal of the tournament in spectacular fashion when Joe Cole just unloaded from way the fuck outside the box to score what's gotta be one of England's greatest goals ever. That allowed England to take the lead into halftime, but it wouldn't last long after. Off a corner in the 51st minute, Marcus Alback's header got past Ashley Cole on the line to bring Sweden back. After equalizing, Sweden would take over and dominate the game. They had all the chances and made England look like mugs, having go-ahead goals blocked by both the crossbar and Steven Gerrard, but the English found the late winner instead on a great header from Gerrard. With just a few minutes left to find another equalizer, Sweden poured forward and actually did indeed make it 2-2 when Henrik Larsson scored a really sweaty goal. We take him and we get him because it means another non-loss to England. Sweden would be going through the knockouts in 2nd place because they didn't beat Trinidad, and because of that their next destination was Allianz Arena in Munich for a date with the hosts. Sweden versus Germany has always been a classic World Cup battle, but this was not their most competitive game. Sweden looked good coming in, battling an England team that was seen at the time as more talented than the German team they were about to play. Nah, though, Germany just ripped them apart limb from limb in the first half and scored twice, both coming from Lukas Podolski. Andreas Isaksson balled out in goal. The Germans could have easily scored even more in this one, but in the 35th minute, Swedish defender Teddy Lucic would pick up his 2nd yellow card and give the team a man disadvantage on top of all of this. Germany called off the dogs from here, and the game remained 2-0, where it would end. Sweden's World Cup run was unceremoniously ended in extremely disappointing fashion. It's South Africa 2010 time now, and Sweden got kind of cooked by their group draw, where they got stuck with Portugal, Denmark, Hungary, and then Albania and Malta, but that's a pretty goddamn tough group. Sweden started poorly, drawing 0-0 in Tirana as well as at home against Portugal in their first 3 games, luckily beating Hungary at home in the other one. They would then get a third 0-0 draw in 4 games, with another 0-0 at the return leg in Porto, and after losing to Denmark in their next game, this was getting critical. Sweden would win their next 3 games, 2 against Malta and the third being the return leg in Budapest thanks to a stoppage time winner from Zlatan to mark a sweep of the points against the Hungarians. This allowed Sweden to pass both them and Portugal to sit in second place behind their fellow Scandinavians with 2 games to go. Their penultimate game in Copenhagen was make or break, and unfortunately for Sweden, they would lose 1-0 on a 78th minute goal from Jakob Poulsen. They fell a point behind Portugal for second place with this result, and even after beating Albania in the final game, Portugal would beat Malta to knock Sweden out of the World Cup for the first time since the 90s. Sweden's group for Brazil 2014 was Germany, yikes, and also Ireland, Austria, and then the Faroe Islands and Kazakhstan. Opening with wins over the 2 bottom feeders, and yeah, they had to come from behind to beat the Faroe Islands. What about it? Sweden would fall 4-0 behind against Germany at the Olympiastadion before storming all the way back with 4 goals of their own to secure the most unlikely point maybe ever. A 0-0 draw at home with the Irish was a less desirable result, and losing in Vienna was really bad. Sweden sat in a 3-way tie with those 2 teams after 6 games. Winning 2-1 in Dublin in Game 7 was huge, and it put Sweden by themselves in second. A win in Astana put Sweden in a position going into Game 9 where a win against Austria clinches second place no matter what happens against Germany. Austria took the lead through Martin Harnik, but an equalizer from Martin Olsen and an 86-minute winner from Zlatan let Sweden beat the Austrians and clinch a playoff spot, even despite another wild game against Germany, ending 5-3 in favor of the Central Europeans. 16 goals scored between both teams in 2 games. That's insane. Sweden would unfortunately drop Portugal in the UEFA playoffs, pitting Ibrahimovic against Ronaldo for 1 spot in the World Cup. This was a diabolical draw, and Portugal had the advantage after leg 1 in Lisbon, when CR7 scored in the 82nd minute for the only goal of the game. Going back to Solna, a scoreless first half led to madness in the second half. Ronaldo scored early to double Portugal's lead, but Zlatan would follow that up with not 1 but 2 goals to put this tie on a razor's edge. Portugal still held the lead in the playoffs on those goofy away goals, but 1 more Swedish goal meant they were going to the World Cup. Unfortunately, Ronaldo struck again. He got his own brace in the 77th minute to give the Lusitanians some breathing room, and then he got his hat-trick 2 minutes later to finish off the Swedes. Portugal was going back to the World Cup, and Sweden would be missing for the 2nd straight World Cup, as was the rest of the Scandinavian national teams. There was none of them at this World Cup somehow. I had still yet to see Sweden play in a World Cup going into Russia 2018, and after their qualifying group draw, I thought I'd have to wait a few more years. They got put in a group with France and the Netherlands, along with 3 irrelevant teams, because it all came down to these 3. A draw against the Dutch in Game 1 led to a good start, where they sat in second place halfway through the double round robin with only a loss to France. An upset win against Les Bleus in Game 6 made it possible that Sweden could even win the group, but an upset loss in Sofia threw that away. Still, they were 3 points ahead of the Dutch going into the last 3 games. A 4-0 win in Minsk and a crazy 8-0 throttling of Luxembourg pumped Sweden's goal difference up to the point that the Netherlands just couldn't catch them. Even though Sweden lost to the Dutch 2-0 in their last game, they would finish 8 goals ahead of the Dutch on goal difference, and thus, it was Sweden who was going to the UEFA playoffs for the 2nd straight campaign, and the back-to-back semi-finalists were out. This was well and good, but now Sweden was going to have to beat Italy in a 2-legged playoff, and the Swedes might as well just give up now. Italy doesn't miss the World Cup. They never do. Leg 1 in Solna saw Sweden score early in the second half on a fluky goal, and they would keep that 1-0 lead for the rest of the game to go to Italy ahead in the tie. At the San Siro with a World Cup bid on the line, Sweden just had to dig in. They withstood every Italian attack, got to halftime tied, then continued to hold out as the crowd at the San Siro started panicking. The idea of Italy missing the World Cup was completely foreign at the time, but when Sweden laid the finishing touches on a playoff-clinching 0-0 draw, that had just become their reality for only the 2nd time ever. Sweden was going to the World Cup for the first time in over a decade, and they had to knock out both the Dutch and Italians to do it. Their reward for all this hard work, by the way, they would be going to Russia to play in a group with the holders Germany, a tough South Korea, and a Mexico team that always reaches the knockouts. The craziest part about all this is that they did all this without Zlatan, who had retired from the national team after the Euros. There's definitely a bit of viewing theory going on here, because as soon as Zlatan left the national team, they started playing more effective soccer. The defense looked good. Emil Forsberg was dangerous in the midfield. There was reason for optimism, even though I thought the Swedes would be grouped here. The first game in Nizhny Novgorod against South Korea all came down to one call. The first half was scoreless, and the second half was going the same direction. Sweden had a failed attack in the box, and that's all it looked like it was. But upon further review from VAR, Kim Min-woo got for a foul in the box on Victor Claesson. The Koreans were pissed, but I doubt any Italians or Spaniards were sympathetic. Swedish defender and captain Anders Grenqvist stepped up and sent Jo Hyun-woo the wrong way, putting the blue and yellow ahead in a lead they would keep. They would hold out for the rest of the game to clinch the 3 points and join Mexico at the top of the group table after Eltri's amazing upset of Germany. Sweden would go to Sochi to play Germany in a hugely important game. Germany needed all 3 points after losing to Mexico, and Sweden could potentially clinch their spot in the next round if they got all 3 points. The first half was dominated by Germany. They had multiple chances to score that were denied by Robin Olsen in goal, but the only team to get a goal in the first half was Sweden through a freaky-looking goal scored by Ola Toivonen. Sweden having this lead at halftime felt like a glitch in the Matrix, but the simulation would right itself with Marco Reus scoring early in the second half to even things back up. The rest of the second half would once again be dominated by Germany, once again to no avail. By the time the 82nd minute came around, it was still 1-1, and German defender Jeremy Boateng would be sent off for picking a second yellow card up. Germany was full on playing with their food, and they almost paid the ultimate price. Olsen saved a header from Mario Gomez, Julian Brandt was denied by the post. It was looking like Germany was never going to find their winner. Then it happened. Sweden conceded an unnecessary free kick from a tight angle, definitely one too tight for Toni Kroos to go directly on goal. He took the free kick and rolled it up to Marco Reus, who was only standing a few feet away. Reus rolled it back, Kroos shot from a slightly less insane angle, and he hit it perfectly. It's one of my favorite World Cup goals of all time. It's beautiful aesthetically and changed so much in this group. It brought Germany back into the fold and put a lot of stakes on Mexico versus Sweden in Game 3. The game in Yekaterinburg was a complicated one. Sweden would get in with a win, especially if it was by 2 goals, but there was a chance they'd be tying Mexico at the top of the group on 6 points and seeing Germany join them on 6 points after beating last place South Korea. Goal difference was going to be important, but Sweden just needed to get the result in the first place, otherwise they were doomed for sure. Against a Mexican team that was balling out in their first 2 games in Russia, Sweden looked like the better team in the first half, but had nothing to show for it going into the intermission. In danger of seeing Mexico grow back into the game and get a result out of this, Ludvig Augustinsson scored a fluky-ass goal to put the Swedes in the lead, and that was the worst thing that could have happened for Mexico. The roof fell in for them, with Hector Moreno bringing down Marcus Berg in the box and Grenqvist hitting his second penalty of the World Cup. At 2-0, Sweden would score a third goal to finish things off with a long throw-in and a really bad own goal from Edson Alvarez. Sweden was through to the next round no matter what, and with Germany losing to South Korea somehow, they'd be going through alongside Mexico. The strength of this 3-0 win meant that Sweden was somehow 2 for 2 on winning extremely tough World Cup groups in the 21st century. This was huge, too, because Mexico got stuck with Brazil in the round of 16, and Sweden would be matched up with a more even opponent, Switzerland. St. Petersburg would bear witness to a pretty unexciting matchup between 2 European underdogs, with the winner making their first quarterfinal appearance in a while. Switzerland hadn't been there since their own World Cup in 1954, whereas for Sweden it had been since their great third-place run in 94, which is still kind of wild. I love matchups like this for what it means for the national teams and their fan bases, but with these kind of matchups in the round of 16, they usually don't result in great games, and that was the case here. The first half started pretty poor, with Sweden getting the best of the chances, but all of them either being bottled or saved by the great Jan Sommer and goal for the Swiss. Going into the second half, still tied 0-0, the Swedes would find their goal about midway through the half when Emil Forsberg shot from distance, and the ball clipped off the leg of Swiss defender Manuel Kanji, shooting past Sommer in goal to put the Swedes in the lead. Switzerland just didn't look potent enough to find an equalizer. Their offense was completely shut down by the Swedish defense, and if anyone was going to score, it was probably going to be Sweden finding a second goal to end it. They damn near did that in stoppage time too, with Swiss defender Michael Lang bringing down Martin Olsen just outside the box to deny a goal-scoring opportunity. This resulted in a free kick just on the edge of the box, but Lang was sent off for the Swiss for one last kick in the teeth for them. The game ended 1-0 Sweden, and the team that hadn't even been in the World Cup for over a decade was now going to the quarterfinals. After taking down the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, and Switzerland, Sweden would run into another big name in Samara. This had become a bit of a rivalry over the years, with England going over 4 decades without beating Sweden in a soccer game. But even though Three Lions ended that streak in 2011, there was still a sense, for me at least, that Sweden could pull a surprise here against a national team that was known for bottling it in big games. It wasn't meant to be, though. Sweden wasn't played off the pitch, but England was the more clinical team. It took the lead on a corner goal headed in by Harry Maguire and kept that lead through halftime thanks to an amazing save from Jordan Pickford on the header from Marcus Berg. A second header goal scored by Dele Alli in the 59th minute ended it, with Pickford keeping Sweden out of goal for the remainder of the game and finishing off the 2-0 win for England. It was a great run for the Swedish, but it was time for them to bow out and let the big boys play. This egalitarian Swedish team was a breath of fresh air after years of Zlatan hero ball, but unfortunately the team wasn't meant to last. Sweden had a good run at Euro 2020, winning a group that had Spain in it, but they were upset in the round of 16 by Ukraine, ending their run prematurely. For Qatar 2022, their group draw was tough, putting them in a group with Spain, Greece, and 2 ascendant pot 4 and 5 teams in Georgia and Kosovo. Sweden started this off with a win against Georgia at home, followed it up with a big 3-0 win in Pristina, and then pulled off a shock win at home against Spain. This put Sweden in the driver's seat in the group out of nowhere, although a loss in Athens in their next game stunted their momentum a bit. Home wins against Kosovo and Greece got Sweden to the top of the group after 6 games, sitting 2 points ahead of Spain, but a loss in Game 7 in Batumi, Georgia, thanks to a brace from Kvica Kvaratskhelia, put Ladoha on top of the group going into the last match day, where Spain and Sweden would go head-to-head. A Swedish win would have given the blue and yellow the automatic ticket for the World Cup, but a late winner from Alvaro Moratas would see Spain grab that ticket instead and damn Sweden to the UEFA playoffs again. This wasn't a bad outcome considering the group they were drawn into, and they would be bracketed into the playoffs against Czechia, with the winner playing Poland for a direct spot in the World Cup. The semifinal against Czechia and Solna was dominated by Sweden throughout, but they just couldn't find the goal. The game got to 90 minutes with both teams still at 0, putting the game into extra time. It was all the way in the 110th minute that Robin Quaison would find the breakthrough for the Swedes, and Czechia didn't have an answer. The game ended 1-0 Sweden, sending them to Chorzów for a big game against Poland. This game was similar to begin, with Sweden having the better chances in the first half, but Wojciech Szczesny keeping them out to keep the game at 0-0. Coming out of halftime though, Jesper Karlström made a big mistake and brought down Gregor Krychowiak in the box to give the Poles a penalty. With Robert Lewandowski stepping up to take it, this was free real estate. The pen was put away, Sweden was behind 1-0, and with the brick wall that was Szczesny in goal, this was always going to be tough. Peter Zielinski put the game away with a goal in the 72nd minute, and the game went at 2-0. Poland was going on to the World Cup, and Sweden was out on both sides of a 2018 quarterfinal run. That brings us to North America 2026, where Sweden 1000% had the worst qualifying campaign out of anyone who's going to be at the World Cup this year. They were put into a theoretically wide open group with Switzerland, Slovenia, and Kosovo again, and there were no easy outs in this group. Sweden started this with a 2-2 draw in Ljubljana against Slovenia. Then they lost 4 straight games. 2-0 in Pristina, 2-0 at home against Switzerland, 1-0 at home against Kosovo, and then 4-1 in Geneva. Sweden got torn apart limb by limb in this group, and after bookending their campaign with a second draw against Slovenia, Sweden finished at the bottom of the group on 2 points. Sweden finished nowhere close to Switzerland at the top of the group, who grabbed the automatic spot in the World Cup, and they didn't finish anywhere close to Kosovo in second place, who grabbed the playoff spot. After Game 4, they fired their manager responsible for this horrid campaign, letting go of extremely unpopular Danish manager Jan Dahl Tomasson, and hiring Brighton legend Graham Potter to try and save this, but it was too little too late. That should have been it. Sweden is humiliatingly out of the World Cup, but this is where everyone's favorite competition strikes again. That's right, the Nations League is here to bail Sweden out, giving them one of the last couple of spots in the UEFA playoffs to keep the Swedes alive. They would be bracketed against Ukraine, with the best blue and yellow team hosting either Poland or Albania in the final for a spot in the World Cup. Playing against Ukraine in neutral Valencia, Sweden had a chance for revenge for Euro 2021, and thanks to their new star striker Viktor Gyökeres, who got a hat trick, Sweden ran away 3-1 winners in a game that they low-key dominated. After proving they were the best yellow and blue team in Europe, Sweden was on to the final of this bracket in another revenge spot, going up against Poland with a chance to avenge their loss in the 2022 UEFA World Cup playoffs. I had this game on in the background as I paid most of my attention to Italy versus Bosnia, especially in the second half, but this was a legitimately good game. Poland gets shit on for playing passive, but they showed up and arguably looked like the better team for the majority of this game. Still though, Sweden took the lead first in the 20th minute on a great team goal set up by Yasina Ayari and finished by Anthony Alanga. Poland would equalize not long after in a shot from Nikola Zalewski that Christopher Nordfeldt really should have stopped. The game really should have gotten to halftime 1-1, but Sweden would strike with a set-piece goal and a brilliant free kick from Daniel Svensson that was whipped into Gustav Lagerbielke for a bullet header. Holding the lead going into the second half, Sweden would quickly lose it when Matty Cash put a ball into the box that was pinged around until Karol Swiderski put it away to make it 2-2. The score held from there until near stoppage time, when Sweden tried salvaging a cleared corner and all hell broke loose. Multiple attempts were made on goal. Lucas Bergvall had a shot saved by Kamil Grabara. Besford Zanelli shot and hit the crossbar. And then my boy Victor Gyökeres finally put the ball into the back of the net to win it for Sweden. Yep, after 2 draws and 4 losses in the group stages amid 0 wins, Sweden was somehow going to the World Cup. This is insane. We've never really seen anything like this. There's qualifying through the back door, and then there's whatever this is. They didn't really get a great group draw considering everything, entering a tough group with the Netherlands, Japan, and Tunisia, where progress is not guaranteed. Dutch and Japanese are both teams threatening to make deep runs, and Tunisia is a tough out as well. Sweden really could finish anywhere in this group. Let's do Group F predictions, and this is my toughest task yet. I don't feel confident at all in these predictions, but I do have the Netherlands and Japan drawing 1-1 in their first game, with Sweden shithousing a 1-0 win over Tunisia to top the group after the first games. I then have Sweden losing 2-1 to the Dutch to see the Oranje go to the top of the group, while Tunisia gets their first point with a 1-1 draw against Japan. This may be wishful thinking for me, but I have Japan breaking through in their final game with a 2-0 win over Sweden that actually sees them top the group after the Dutch draw 0-0 with Tunisia and Kansas City. My final group table has Japan in first and the Netherlands in second, both going on to the knockouts. Tunisia is in last place and out, and Sweden is in third place, and out of the 6 groups we've gone through, I have them currently in last place out of the third place teams, and that means they're probably also eliminated with how this is shaking out. Thank you all for watching this one. It was a long one, and I could have gone even deeper, but I was low-key in a rush to get this one done, and I hope that didn't show too much throughout this script. I do think Sweden is a fascinating national team in the grand scheme of things, sitting as an unglamorous underdog who feels like they've been left behind by the modern-day international soccer scene. They're still here, though. They still have my boy Victor Gyökeres and Alexander Isak as well, and they could really make some noise at this year's tournament, especially if they get out of the groups. We're halfway through this freaking series now. Today was video number 24, and we go into the second half of the series with another big one tomorrow. It's going to be even longer. We're talking about Belgium tomorrow.